In this lesson, we're going to get started with scripting by creating the player movement script. Alright, so to get started, let's go to our scripts folder, and we're going to right-click and create a new C# script. Let's go ahead and call this player movement, and double-click on that. And that should bring up MonoDevelop. Now once MonoDevelop has been loaded, we can come in and we can start adding in some variables. Now what I like to do with all of my C# script is I like to take these curly brackets and I like to go just to the left of them and hit enter, so that way they are in line with one another. And I do that with all of my functions. Okay, so that just helps me keep things nice, clean, and organized. So the first thing that we want to do is create some variables. So the first variable that I want to create is going to be a public variable because I want it to be exposed in the inspector. And it's going to be a float variable, and we're going to name the variable speed. I'm going to hit the tab key a few times, and we're going to go out and we're going to say, let's say our speed is going to be 10. So we'll do 10.0 and then end with a semicolon. Okay, now we added the F in there because we only wanted to go out one decimal place on our float value. Okay. So the next variable that we're going to create is going to be public float reverse speed. And we're going to set this equal to, let's say 5.0. And then we'll create another variable. This one's going to be a float as well. And this is going to be our turn speed. And we're going to hit tab and go out. And let's do, right off the bat, let's do 0.6. Okay, F. And there we go. Now we're going to have two private variables. Now private variables are, what this is going to do is it's going to hide it from the inspector. Private variables are going to be variables that we don't want the designer to adjust. Okay, so give the designer what they need and then hide what they don't necessarily need. So in this case, we're going to say private float move direction. And we're going to set this equal to 0.0 for right now. And then we'll say private float turn direction. Make sure you spell it correctly. And set this one equal to 0.0f as well. So now that we have these variables set, what do we do at this point? Well, we need to start implementing those variables to move our car forward. Now, at this point, we need to think about how we want the car to move. I know that by the game design document that I created, I want the car to move using rigid bodies. Now, rigid body is going to allow us to move the car using physics. And so I'm going to use some of the functions under rigid body to propel that car forward. And specifically what I have in mind is going to be add force. So to get started with this, let's go ahead and go into our update function, and let's create a simple line of code. So we're going to say move direction equals input dot get axis, and then we're going to say what axis we want to recognize that the player presses. So in this case, it's going to be a vertical button, and then we're going to multiply that by speed. Now, if you're a brand new beginner to scripting, if you have never experienced C# scripting whatsoever, it would be a great idea if you just stopped right now and you went to the Introduction to C# in Unity course and went through that. So that way you know exactly what all of this is doing. Okay, now you're going to learn some things along the way if you've gone through that. Okay, it's just going to be some practice. All right, so now we have our move direction, and it's going to be based on the input from the player. So it's going to look for a vertical button. Now the vertical button is a button that is set up in the input manager in Unity. So in this case, a vertical button would be W or S, or the up and down arrow key on the keyboard. And then we're going to take that value, which is going to be 0 to 1, and we're going to multiply that by speed, which is 10. So we're getting an output of 10. Now after this, we need to tell it to physically move the object. And we're going to move the object by using a rigid body, and we're going to say .add relative force. Now I want to use add relative force because I want it to add force to the car no matter what direction it's pointing in 3D space. And then we're going to say what direction do we want to add the force. So right now it's asking for a vector 3 force, and I'm going to use the vector 3 format. Now vector 3 is a coordinate in 3D space. It's going to be 0 in your x direction, 0 in my y direction, and then I want it to move in my z direction, so I'm going to say by move direction. Okay, so whatever value we get out of move direction, it's going to propel it using add relative force. So let's go ahead and save this script. Let's go into Unity and hit play. Once we hit play, well, we won't be able to see anything because our camera is off, so let's tie that camera to our object here. Let me select the player prefab, and let's go ahead and go to game object, and actually let's select our main camera. Let's go to game object and align to, or move to view. Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll rotate that 90 degrees so it's facing down, and then I'm going to pull that back and then pull it up in the Z. Okay, and just kind of get it positioned. You can see a preview of what that looks like. You might put it a little bit ahead of the car, something like that. And then we'll just simply link the main camera down to the prefab object. Okay, just like so. Now if I hit play and we hit the W key, you'll notice that nothing is happening. Why? Well, we haven't tied that script to our PFB player car. So let's select the object, add component, scripts, player movement. Now once that has been added, now if we hit the W key, you'll see that nothing is happening still, but this time we're getting a warning, so we're on the right track. It's saying that there's no rigid body attached to our car. So what we need to do is add a component. So let's add component, physics, rigid body. Now with the rigid body, we want to make sure that we are turning use gravity off because I don't need gravity for my car. And I don't want is kinematic to be on, so we're going to leave it just the way it is and hit play. Now if we hit the W key, you'll notice that it's moving, but you'll notice that it's rotating now. So what's happening now? Well, because of the rigid body being applied, we need to make sure that we have some constraints turned on. So what we're going to do is we're going to freeze the rotations on the X and the Z, as we don't want it to flip around just like we saw there. And then I'm also going to freeze the Y position, as I don't want it to move up in the Y position. So now if I hit play with those constraints on, we can move forward, and everything's working great. So we're moving backward. Everything looks good. Now you'll notice that it can be kind of hard to move at times. Okay, trying to move backward is very, very difficult. And the reason for that is probably because of the track prefab that we have set. On the track, you'll see that the box collider is actually a collider. It's not a trigger. So it's working with that rigid body and it's slowing it down. Now I don't want that. Okay, I don't need the track to affect my physics in any way unless I script it to do that. So what we'll do is we're going to select one of these, or actually let's just go to the prefab itself. And with this prefab, we're going to hit is trigger, and we'll turn that on. That will update all of the pieces. So if I select one, you'll see that it now says is a trigger. Now if I hit play and we start to move, we're no longer being slowed down by the pieces themselves. So now we've got our movement forward, and we also have our movement backward. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to get our turn direction going. So in our next lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to get into that portion of the scripting, and then we're also going to take a look at how we can create a little bit more of a realistic behavior. As you can see right now, the car is moving on its own, and it's kind of acting like it's on ice. So we'll take care of those issues next.